The most curious anecdotes of history. History seems exciting to me, especially if it is well told. León V, Lord of Madrid, Guadalajara, and Ciudad Real. How a king of Armenia ended up being Lord of Madrid, Guadalajara and Ciudad Real. Well, for a start of generosity of Juan I of Castile. León V had been taken prisoner in 1375 by the Mamluks and taken to Cairo. The kings of Castile and Aragon and Pope Clement VII decided to help him to be released, but finally neither Pedro IV nor the pontiff gave him money. So that it could be maintained, Juan I granted him the lordship of Madrid, Andújar, Guadalajara and Villarreal, today, Ciudad Real, and an income of 150,000 maravedíes. However, it was so unpopular among the locals, focused only on taking money, that Juan I promised that he would never give it away again. The secretary who loaded the Spain brand. As it happens now, a country that is too powerful does not usually have the sympathy of others. That happened to the Spanish Empire in the 16th century. Antonio Perez, secretary of Felipe II, put the finishing touch. He intruded against the king's brother, trying to get them to face each other, but the shot backfired and he had to flee. As his family came from Aragon, which was governed by its own jurisdiction and where it would not be so easy to judge him, he went to Zaragoza. The king used the Inquisition to imprison him, but the Aragonese mutinied. Felipe II sent his army, but by then Antonio Perez had escaped again, first to France and then to England. There he offered the information with which the Black Legend would be created. It would be of little use to him, because at the death of Philip II his figure ceased to be of interest and he died in poverty. Oranges from China. Now we know that oranges come from China, or from India, but when the first Spanish travelers arrived in China and saw something as commonplace here as an orange, they could not believe it. That is one of the possible origins of the expression. Another is that vendors advertised oranges from China when it was still not possible to bring them in good condition, but customers did not sting. In any case, the origin of the word orange is curious. It comes from Sanskrit and from there it passed into Arabic. They were the ones who brought them to Spain, and from the loss of letters from the Spanish and Armenia to languages like English. However, in Arabic sounds Portugal, like Portugal, since the Portuguese brought in the 16th century new varieties unknown until then. The Donkey Painter. In the Hall of the Independence of 1910 the work entitled Atlas Oles and Dormit sur l'Adriatic, and the sun fell asleep on the Adriatic, by one Joachim Raphael Bernali was exhibited. The painter also published an artistic manifesto in the newspapers, something common at the time, which put it on everyone's lips. The mystery about the character lasted until the painter Roland Dorgels told the truth to the editor of the newspaper Le Matin. Bernali was the pseudonym of Lolo, the donkey of the owner of the famous cabaret, still open, Le Lapin Agile. Together with other painters, he tied a brush with which he painted his best, and only, work to the animal's tail. The invention of the electric chair. Fixing people was not the original use of the electric chair, it was a marketing strategy. Its inventor was Harold P. Brown, an employee of Thomas Edison during the so-called War of the Currents. Edison used the direct current, but saw how Nikola Tesla devised the alternating current, which allowed it to be transported further without losses. To convince the public of its danger, Brown created the electric chair, which electrocuted several animals, including an elephant. It was of little use when Tesla himself exposed himself to the current without suffering damage. For what it was useful, the invention was to convince the state of New York that this method was more human than the hanging. To find a battle, you have to find the first bone. Finding a bone from 1200 BC is not so rare. What is truly special about the discovery made by amateur archaeologist Ronald Borgwart while walking with his father along the banks of the Tolens River was that the bone had a spear point stuck in it. Since then, he continued to search for remains in the area, until he found the remains of 130 people. This Battle of Tolens, in which it is estimated that more than 750 people were able to participate, is the oldest one in which there is evidence, although there are texts in which other previous ones are narrated. The release of the prisoners of the Bastille. If they know something they can do in France, they are symbols, the Eiffel Tower, the baguette, among them is the capture of the Bastille. In 1789, the French people were fed up with their king. The Bastille had become the symbol of their excesses after being there detained characters such as Voltaire or, at that time, the Marquis de Sade, supporter of the revolution. To add fuel to the fire, the prisoner said they were going to kill the inmates screaming from the window of his cell. On July 14, the revolutionaries decided to take the July prison, which had more than 100 soldiers. The surprise came when, after the capture, they discovered that there were only 7 prisoners and that the Marquis de Sade had been transferred to an asylum a few days before. Make a discovery by playing with elephant droppings. The traces of Italy, Tanzania, show that hominids were already standing on their feet 3.5 million years ago. The funny thing is that they were discovered when Andrew Hill and David Western, 2 members of the team led by the anthropologist Mary Leakey, became so bored that they started throwing elephant dung. When Hill bent down to look for more ammunition, he realized he was on the tracks. Makeup to avoid infections. Makeup is nothing new, and to check it you just have to see the ancient Egyptians. Long before the first lipstick, in Egypt they already put on their eyes with coal made with lead, which prevented infectious diseases in the eyes. And of course, makeup was not just a woman's thing, men and boys applied coal equally. An illiterate king. For centuries, that a king did not know how to read was not unusual. For example, Charlemagne could not read and yet undertook a small renaissance during his reign. Another thing was that at the end of the 17th century, when reading was widespread among the wealthier classes, a king could not read. It was the case of Carlos II, called the Bewitched, although probably that was the least of his problems. He did not speak correctly until he was 10 years old, and when walking he had to lean on something to avoid falling. As king, he delegated the government, which did not go badly. During his reign there was no bankruptcy, unlike his father, his grandfather and his great-grandfather. Its greater lack was not to give an heir to Corona, which would cause to its death the War of Secession. A giraffe for the Emperor of China. If the Chinese did not discover America, it is because they did not propose it. At the same time that Columbus had better ships than Europeans, but instead of heading east, they focused on knowing better what they had near, and they knew they existed. He was the best of his navigators, with boats 100 meters larger than the São Gabriel de Vasco da Gama, for example, which did not reach 24 meters. 7 trips Cheng made to Sri Lanka, Sumatra, India, Maldives. From his 4th trip he returned with a Kailine Kama, a mythological animal that only appeared before the great rulers, and which he gave to the Emperor Yongle. Actually it was a simple giraffe. The Valyrian fire is actually Greek. In Game of Thrones, to avoid the conquest of the King's Landing, Valyrian fire is launched from the walls. Oddly enough, this scene is actually based on a historical event, the Siege of Constantinople, 674, 678 and 717-718. However, it is believed that its inventor was Archimedes, who in the year 214 A.C. destroyed part of the Roman fleet with the so-called Greek fire during the Siege of Syracuse. Of little use the invention, Syracuse would be taken 2 years later and Archimedes killed. The dance of San Vito was real. Now it is just an expression, but like most, the San Vito dance has a historical basis. Between the 14th and 17th centuries there were several epidemics of a mysterious illness that made the mourners could not stop dancing until they died of exhaustion. As many were brought before the image of San Vito to try to remedy it, with the name of the saint the disease remained. From one of these episodes occurred in 1237 the story of the Pied Piper was born. Laurel against baldness. In antiquity men did not wear well bald. Although many like Hippocrates sought the solution by throwing everything in their hair, Julius Caesar found a definitive remedy. He asked the Senate to let him always wear the laurel wreath that the triumphant generals could carry on entering Rome. That way you would not see the bald spot. The first murder occurred in Atapuerca. The first murder of which they have evidence happened about 430,000 years ago in Atapuerca, Burgos. The victim was the owner of the skull 17, which has marks of 2 strong blows made from top to bottom, which rules out the accident. Of the weapon only it is known that it was a blunt object and the aggressor, who was right-handed. The King of the Silver Mask. Baldwin IV, King of Jerusalem between 1174 and 1185, for years hid his face with a silver mask. The reason was that he suffered the ravages of leprosy, which had left him without a nose, giving rise to the nickname of Pig King. Despite the disease, for which many people were despised, the subjects of Baldwin were loyal to their king until his death. It seems that his illness did not prevent him from even putting himself at the head of his armies against the troops of Saladin who wanted to conquer his kingdom. Phryne, beautiful and intelligent. Women in ancient Greece were imprisoned in the gynecium of their home and lacked rights that, for example, Egyptian women, for example, enjoyed at the same time. That's why Phryne stands out, the lover and model of the sculptor Praxiteles, of whom numerous anecdotes that highlight her intelligence are preserved. For example, on one occasion Praxiteles offered her a sculpture, but she did not know which one to choose. For this he shouted that there was fire in the workshop, to which the sculptor reacted by wanting to save the statue of Cupid, which was evidently the one he ended up choosing. A war to be confused from the street. If on June 28, 1914 Leopold Lotko had not been mistaken for a street, perhaps history would have been different. But he did, and the engine of the car he was driving stopped just as he made a maneuver to take the right path to the hospital in Sarajevo, when Gavrilo Princip took the opportunity to shoot the Austrian Archduke Francisco Fernando, who was in the car, and his wife. The one-armed Lepanto was not maimed. The detractors of Miguel de Cervantes gave him the nickname of El Manco de Lepanto, which has survived to this day. However, Cervantes kept his two arms all his life, only that he lost part of the mobility of the left as a result of the injury suffered during the famous Battle of 1571. Queen after death. The Galician noble Inés de Castro never became Queen of Portugal, in life. Lover of Pedro de Portugal, was rejected both by his father, Alfonso IV, as by the nobles. The lovers were secretly married, but to prevent her from reigning, several nobles murdered her in 1355. 2 years later, Pedro ascended the throne and, according to legend, he exhumed the corpse of his beloved so that she could be crowned. In any case, Inés is considered Queen of Portugal and was buried in the Alcobaça monastery next to the burial of Pedro. The Door of Heaven, especially for the Jews. Between 1943 and 1944, La Puerta del Cielo was filmed in Rome, a film directed by Vittorio De Sica and produced by the Vatican, in which the journey of several pilgrims to Loreto was told. In fact, the film itself was the least interesting to everyone. It was a simple cover to save 300 Jews and anti-fascists from death. To achieve this, it was said that they were technicians and extras and they were accommodated in the Basilica of St. Paul outside the walls, where the recording was made. The recording was extended just until the day before the arrival of the Allies, what is necessary to save hundreds of people. The film, on the other hand, passed without pain or glory.